It's been another night of extraordinary temperature contrasts across the UK. These were the temperatures on Tuesday morning, almost 19-degree difference from northern Scotland to southern England. When will it turn milder in the south? When will it turn colder in the north? What are the longer-term trends heading into February? And what's all this about a sudden stratospheric warming that people are talking about? Don't worry, I'll explain what a sudden stratospheric warming is if you don't know already, and the implications for the UK's weather. Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern, a meteorologist and weather presenter here at the Met Office, and thank you for joining me for this week's deep dive into the UK's weather. Before we get into the chances of seeing a return to colder weather later in the season, let's talk about the very current cold weather that we are seeing for southern parts of the UK and why there is such a difference across the country. We saw a similar difference Monday morning's temperatures. We were close to minus 10 Celsius at Santon Downham in Suffolk, and similar temperatures in the Northwest Highlands. I think we saw around 10 Celsius. So almost 20-degree temperature contrast on both nights, and on Monday afternoon we saw similar contrasts with a maximum of just 2 Celsius across parts of London and the southeast, whilst parts of northern Scotland saw 12 degrees. We're expecting 13 degrees for Aberdeenshire today, but it's going to take its time to warm up in the south. And actually, let's take a look at some more recent weather observations. This thing here, it's a satellite image of the southeast corner you can see. You can see the cloud cover that has developed overnight, and that's actually kept things frost-free in the southeast. These were the temperatures about an hour or two before the recording of this. 4 to 6 Celsius in the far southeast, but where we've got the clear skies, this darker part of the satellite image here, that's the clear area. Well below freezing, -3, -4 Celsius across parts of Hertfordshire into Essex and Surrey as well. And these circled observations here, that's where we've still got some freezing fog. So southern parts of the UK, last couple of nights, very cold, well below freezing, frost and some of those freezing fog patches. Of course, Heathrow started the day on Monday with freezing fog, which disrupted some flights. And Sunday night into Monday was the coldest night in Heathrow since December 2010, and it was the coldest January night since 1987. So that's the kind of cold weather that we're talking about across southern parts of the UK. Remarkable that it's a complete contrast further north, where we've got such mild air across northern Scotland. And there is a reason for that. Now, looking back at last week's weather, we had northerly winds across the UK, and that northerly brought cold air to the whole of the UK. That northerly feed then got cut off through the weekend as the jet stream pushed north over the UK. And this is the current state of the jet stream. Let's just rewind it to Tuesday afternoon. The jet streams to the north of the UK, these weather fronts are going to the north, and we've got this southwesterly airflow for the northern half of the UK, so for northern parts of England, Scotland, Northern Ireland. And we've got, if I turn off the jet stream, put the surface winds on, you can see southwesterly winds for the northern half of the UK. But further south, well, those winds haven't made their way further south. We've still got very light winds and, if anything, a bit more of an easterly airflow across southern parts of the UK. Now, that easterly brought some cloud into the southeast corner on Monday night, and that's why it was less cold. But otherwise, we've got light winds, and that cold air has become stagnant. It's just basically sitting in the lowest couple of thousand feet. It's just sitting there, and night after night we've got these clear skies and radiation conditions, temperatures falling away, and we've seen these frosty and foggy conditions across southern parts, but the air being stirred up and mild air pushing across the northern half of the UK has led to much milder air, and that northerly has disappeared. In fact, if I just put on the temperature at 5,000 feet. This is at 5,000 feet, it's worth remembering. It looks like, from this, that the whole of the UK is mild. But actually, it's the very lowest layers of the atmosphere where we've still got that cold air sitting in the south. Whilst at 5,000 feet, if you went up in the sky, you'd possibly find a temperature inversion, temperature getting warmer as you go higher up. In fact, it's probably too warm to snow if you had any precipitation falling out of the clouds in the south, because you've got that warmer layer. If that was to happen, you might have some freezing rain, but of course we've got high pressure in charge and so it's dry at the moment. But yeah, that just shows you that the whole of the UK is affected by this milder air mass coming in from the southwest, and that milder air is prevalent at 5,000 feet above the surface. That's what the temperatures here show. But we know that at the very surface, we've got this dense cold air sitting across southern parts of the UK. So that temperature at 5,000 feet really doesn't reflect on the bottom near the surface, whilst across the northern half of the UK, the air is stirred up by this wind. It's mild across the surface and at 5,000 feet. So that's what the situation is at the moment. We've had this stagnant cold air sitting at the surface, but changes are going to take place over the next couple of days. In fact, it's really through Tuesday night into Wednesday that we'll start to see that change. So I think the very lowest temperatures that we've seen last couple of mornings, they're not going to repeat themselves over the next few mornings. But that's not to say we're not going to see any more frosts, because there will still be some frosts later this week. And what's actually going to happen is the temperatures will even out across the UK. So they're going to lower in the north and they're going to rise in the south. Both areas returning to around average by Thursday. And the reason is because of this cold front here. So what's happening, if we zoom out, is that the jet stream is becoming a little bit more amplified. This bump here, I'll play it forward over the next 24 hours. This ridge of high pressure building out in the Atlantic, the jet stream pushing north into Greenland, and as a result, this segment of the jet stream pushes this cold front southwards. And as that cold front spreads southwards, it's going to introduce, well, on the one hand, a cooler or colder air mass, these blue colours. So that will turn things colder in the north. But at the same time, it's going to stir the air up. It's going to mix things up a lot more. You can think of this cold front as like a giant sweeping brush, sweeping away that cold air that's entrenched at the surface and replacing it with more typical conditions for the time of year, this cold northwesterly airflow, but nowhere near as cold as the air sitting close to the surface at the moment. So by the, Thursday, Friday, we're all in the same boat then. We've got this blue hue on the map, so temperatures close to or a touch below average for the time of year. We've still got high pressure close by. That's going to keep things mostly settled. But this cold front will bring a spell of rain as it crosses the country. And then brighter skies for many, actually. So the cold front will bring a spell of low clouds, some mist, some fog, and so on. Once it clears, later on Wednesday into Thursday, brighter skies for many. And then we're all, back in the same kind of temperature range, close to average. So we're talking about 6 to 8 Celsius by day, and by night a touch of frost in places where we get clear skies. So it's not going to get rid of the overnight frosts. It's going to return the frosts across northern parts of the UK, but it won't be quite as cold by night in the south. So that's the trend through the next few days, and you can see that temperature trend if I pull up a few maps here. And let's see, play that forward. So you can see the very cold air across the surface at the moment, but skipping forward a few days and the colder colours return to the whole of the UK, but the south is less cold than it has been. And in fact, taking a look in closer detail at the actual temperatures we're expecting. And these are maximum temperatures each day. These are Tuesday's maximum temperatures. So you can see these are main urban areas. In some rural spots, particularly where we've got some persistent fog patches, temperatures could again remain close to freezing through the day. But into tomorrow, into Wednesday, and temperatures are starting to rise in the south. They're starting to lower in the north. We've got that colder air from the northwest arriving, replacing the southwesterlies that we've got across northern parts of the UK. So this is where things really start to average themselves out across the UK, and by the start of Thursday, really, Most places are looking at the same kinds of temperatures, 6 to 8 Celsius. And really that trend continues into Friday and into the weekend. Temperatures, I think, in the north will oscillate between milder than average and about average as various weather systems move through. But in the south, it's likely to remain mostly dry, mostly settled. There'll be some cloudier days, there'll be some sunnier days. But again, temperatures are certainly rising compared to what we've seen over the last few days. Minimum temperatures, meanwhile, not quite so straightforward because it does depend on the amount of cloud that we see at night. And there will be some clearer nights, there'll be some cloudier nights, and actually we'll still see some frosty conditions in the south. So Wednesday, for example, will start off with a few places a few degrees below freezing. But on the whole, we've got cloud coming in from the northwest on Wednesday morning, and so less frosty, I think. And the wind starts to pick up then as well. So for the start of Thursday, for example, where we get some shelter from the breeze, where we get some cloud breaks overnight, there'll be a touch of frost in places. I think a frost more widely, certainly a sharper frost in the south on Friday morning with lighter winds and clearer skies. But you can see temperatures across the UK not quite as cold in the north, not quite as mild in the north, not quite as cold in the south. And heading into the weekend, there'll be some frosts, particularly in the south where we get clear skies. Increasingly, it's going to turn windier again through the weekend in the north. So those overnight frosts will start to disappear. Let's take a look at some graphs that show this quite well, and some maximum and minimum graphs, and you'll see the difference between the south and the north. So at the moment, the south is really quite cold, and especially around, say, parts of the Cambridgeshire area. So zooming in here, clicking on Cambridge there, and here's the maximum and minimum temperature trend over the next few days. We're starting off with those frosty conditions and temperatures not far above freezing by day, and then this upward temperature trend for both day and night heading into the weekend, although still the potential for a touch of frost at times over the next few mornings. Meanwhile, we've got parts of Scotland, especially, say, if you look at Stornoway or maybe Aberdeen, and you can see this temperature trend, 13 Celsius today, and then dropping away, particularly where we see the clearance of a cold front, so a frost on Thursday morning, and then temperatures oscillating around average heading into the weekend. But another interesting trend, actually, that we're looking at over the next few days is with the wind speed. And so what we can expect is in the south, winds will pick up. That's the air stirring up a little bit. And if I just run my pen across the screen here, that's not going to work. Nope, that doesn't work. There's a setting in the computer that I haven't ticked to make that work, but basically what it should show is that the winds in the south are staying relatively light at first and then increase slightly. Something a little like this. But in the north, over the next few days, we're going to see those winds really pick up, and particularly into the weekend. And actually, let's take a look at the wind speed graph here, or the wind speed map, and skipping forward to the weekend and probably into Saturday. And you can see those stronger winds starting to develop into Saturday. And by Sunday, there is the risk of gales developing across the far north of Scotland. So increasingly, it's going to turn more changeable once the cold front goes through on Wednesday and into Thursday, and then into the weekend. Further fronts are expected across northern parts of the UK, and it will turn increasingly windy with those winds coming in from the west. The south likely to keep the influence of high pressure, and so taking a look at the bigger picture once again, and for the rest of the week, really, we've got higher pressure retaining its centre of gravity, basically, out to the west and southwest of the UK. So there's its position on Thursday. Cold front's gone through. We've all got this northerly airflow, but brighter skies and temperatures back to around average. Then, during later Thursday into Friday, another weak front passes by northern parts of Scotland, bringing some cloud and some showers. And then this cold front, a bit more of an active feature, arriving through the day on Friday. Friday starts off bright. It starts off with a touch of frost, especially in the south, but then the clouds and the rain return across the northwest, and the wind picks up as well, so increasingly unsettled. And really across, well, the further north you are, basically, the more unsettled it will be into the weekend. This is the wind speed here. You can see the winds picking up, weather fronts going through, and there'll be periods of rain for northern and northwestern Scotland at times. But further south, high pressure retaining its influence, and although over the next few days there'll be some cloudier periods as these weather fronts pass through, very little rainfall really for southern and eastern parts of the UK. In fact, let's take a look at the forecast here for the next few days. Tuesday, a lot of bright weather where we lose the freezing fog across these central areas. Here's the cloud on Tuesday afternoon that has arrived into the southeast, and we've got cloudier skies and quite grey conditions and damp as well across western Scotland, northwest England, southwest Scotland, a lot of low cloud, typical tropical maritime conditions. This tropical maritime air mass, that's the name we give to these southwesterly winds. They bring air from the tropics that passes over the sea, so tropical maritime. And that's the kind of weather that is dominating across western Scotland and northwest England, parts of Northern Ireland at the moment. Grey, damp, mild, breezy. I think some cloud breaks there across parts of Aberdeenshire. That's where 13 Celsius is possible. Meanwhile, the best of the sunshine through this central swathe of the UK, so southwest England into parts of Wales, the Midlands and Norfolk, for example. Then skipping ahead to Wednesday, and we've got this weather front passing south, so a spell of rain overnight and into the start of the day for the north, and then it's really during Wednesday itself that it crosses southern parts of the UK. That then clears away, and you can see it is like that sweeping brush. It clears away the low cloud, the fog, the freezing air at lower levels, and introduces much cleaner air coming in from the northwest initially, then from the north, but always over this area of high pressure, so always keeping things relatively settled. However, there will still be some showers around, and those showers falling as snow over 400-500 metres or so above on the hills in northern Scotland. Showers also feeding into the North Sea coast there as well, one or two dangling down the Irish Sea into parts of Pembrokeshire, for example, perhaps clipping Cornwall. That's Wednesday. Then as we go into Thursday, that weather front's out of the way. We've still got some showers coming into the east, but really by Friday, we're going to see the clouds thicken again, bright but frosty start in the south and southeast, but then it starts to turn changeable once again. Warm fronts pushing into the northwest of Scotland, outbreaks of rain returning here. Again, not much rain, mostly it's just damp rather than soaking wet. The breeze picking up, and by Saturday, that weak front passes its way southwards. Again, an area of cloud, some spots of rain, but nothing significant. And many southern areas staying dry, although increasingly cloudy, I think, heading into the start of the weekend. Showers back into the north by Saturday, and then increasingly windy on Sunday for northern parts of the UK, especially northern Scotland. Risk of gales for the Northern Isles on Sunday, along with some quite lively showers, and those showers could be falling as sleet and snow over some of the high parts of Shetland, I imagine. So that's the basic trend through to the end of the weekend. What happens after that? Well, more of the same, effectively. It's quite a quiet period as far as the weather's concerned, and by quiet I mean nothing particularly stormy, and after the next night or so, nothing particularly cold or mild. We've got high pressure. This is the most likely weather pattern that comes out of many different computer model runs. They highlight the most likely weather pattern here. This gives a 61% probability by Monday that this kind of weather pattern will be dominant across the UK, and that gives high pressure to the southwest of the UK, this northwesterly airflow. The bulk of the rain affecting northern and northwestern Scotland, coming in around the top of that high. We've got the jet stream to the north, and temperatures not far from average for the time of year, so 6 to 8 Celsius by day. Quite windy in the north and northeast potentially. And then this is Tuesday, so the last day of January, and the same kind of weather pattern, 51% chance coming out of the various computer model runs. High pressure to the southwest. Bit more changeable, I think, across northern parts of the UK. That high pressure is slightly further southwest, so a bit breezier. Again, rain or showers in the north and northwest, mostly dry towards the south. Temperatures not far from average for the time of year. So that basically covers the rest of January. And the theme is for temperatures to even out with the loss of the very cold air at the surface in the south and a return to colder air in the north. So temperatures evening out back to average for most of us. And for the wettest weather to affect the far northwest, so mainly northern and northwest Scotland, as well as the windiest weather. Many other places not seeing very much rain at all after the very wet start to January that we had, of course, across southwest England, parts of Wales, northwest England. And these are the probabilities of 10 millimetres in 24 hours, and this again comes out of looking at all the different computer model runs. This is Monday the 30th, Tuesday the 31st, and the colours here indicate that it's going to be mainly western Scotland on Monday the 30th, and more especially the probabilities increase that we'll see some wetter weather on Tuesday the 31st. But really it's western Scotland, perhaps the Northern Isles as well. The rest of the UK, not likely to see very much rainfall at all for the rest of January. So dry January, at least for the last 10 days. Now, what are the trends beyond that? First of all, let's take a look at the temperature trend. A lot of talk about February freeze coming up, but there's no sign, certainly for the first few days of February. This temperature trend graph goes out to the first week of February. And what it shows is Exeter on the top there, Aberdeen on the bottom, and the red line on each of these is the average temperature for the time of year. The blue line is the average overnight temperature, and the dates on the bottom, they go out to Tuesday the 7th of February. So the first week of February this includes. And quite interesting because Aberdeen and Exeter are at two ends of the spectrum at the moment. The boxes on each of these graphs, the reds for daytime and the blues for nighttime temperature, where they show the most likely temperature but also the range. So the bigger the box, the less confidence we have, the less certain we are that those temperatures will be the case by the time we get to that day. Now, the red box here for Exeter shows well below average temperatures by day at the moment, but quite quickly by Wednesday, Thursday, back to around average. And then for the rest of the period, out to the start of February, the red boxes are above the red line, and the blue box is also generally above the blue line. So we're looking at around average or slightly above average for the rest of January and into the start of February for Exeter. And similar for Aberdeen, at the moment it's well above average, then back to around average, and then oscillating around the average lines or just above the average lines. So no sign of a big freeze for the next couple of weeks. It looks like fairly average weather conditions to the end of January and into the start of February. One thing that computer models are picking up on for the start of February is for, just refer back to this for a second, is for that higher pressure influence to slightly wane further south, and that would lead to some of this more changeable weather in the north to extend further south as well. And there's a reason why that looks fairly likely for the start of February, and it's to do with the El Niño southern oscillation. So you might have heard of El Niño or La Niña. This is an oscillation in sea surface temperatures across the Pacific. At the moment, we're in a certain phase of that oscillation, which varies year to year. We're in this phase where you get colder air and sea surface temperatures off the Chile coast, and then warmer sea surface temperatures around Indonesia. That's called La Niña, and there is a correlation between the La Niña conditions in the Pacific and what we see in the UK is a colder start to winter and a milder, more unsettled end to winter. So if that was the only factor controlling our weather, then we would expect conditions for the second half of winter to become more unsettled, wind and rain, but also milder across the UK as well. And with the computer models picking up on that for the start of February, that does indeed look fairly likely that the start of February will be fairly unsettled, bouts of wind and rain, and a return to milder air across the UK. But that's not the only thing we look at when we're considering what the weather will be like in a few weeks' time. We also look at things like the thunderstorm activity over the Pacific, for example, that can have implications on the shape and the position of the jet stream. We also look at the winds in the stratosphere above the North Pole. Now, the winds in the stratosphere above the North Pole become quite strong in the winter typically because what you see is a lot of cold air forming above the North Pole at the surface. And what that cold air leads to is this circulation known as the stratospheric polar vortex. And that circulation surrounds the North Pole. And when it's strong, it can act as a tailwind on the jet stream, which is far below the stratospheric polar vortex. So this circulation in the stratospheric polar vortex, that's at 50 to 90 kilometres above the surface. And then our very own jet stream at, say, 10 kilometres above the surface, if that's going in a strong west to east direction, then the jet stream can also be pushed along, and that leads to more unsettled weather, more low pressure systems, wetter, windier and milder air for the UK. At the moment, the stratospheric polar vortex is indeed very strong. But sometimes this cold pool of air above the North Pole can become disturbed. It can warm up, and that can happen suddenly. And so that's known as a sudden stratospheric warming. When that happens, these stratospheric polar vortex winds can weaken. They can become less strong, and that then can have implications on our own weather. In fact, on the other occasion, it can also reverse, and we see that typically happening every couple of winters or so. It happened in 2018. We saw this reversal of the wind circulation in the stratospheric polar vortex, and that led a couple of weeks later to the beast from the east. However, it doesn't always happen that clearly. Sometimes you get this warming in the North Pole, in the stratosphere, a reversal of the winds, and it doesn't affect our weather. That happened in 2019. So we had this sudden stratospheric warming, very similar to the one that happened in 2018, but other things around the world acted against that signal. And what we saw was very mild conditions, actually. We saw record-breaking temperature in February in the UK. So it doesn't always play out like it did in 2018. And what's important to note is that we're not expecting a sudden stratospheric warming enough to reverse this wind over the next few weeks. But we are expecting some changes to happen to those winds. And this graph shows what we're expecting to happen. At the moment, this is the graph showing the wind speed in the stratosphere surrounding the North Pole. And at the moment, it's way up here. So this is 50 metres per second. It's very strong. But you can see that trend coming out from all these different computer model runs. Each run is represented by a blue line here, and it's dropping away through the rest of this week. Those winds are easing. Now, they don't go below zero, and that's important because if they went below zero, then you'd see a reversal of that wind circulation. It would be known as a major sudden stratospheric warming, but they don't. They don't go below zero in this set of model runs. Most of them stay above zero and then recover a little. So what looks most likely is that this wind circulation, the stratospheric polar vortex, will weaken. The winds will become lighter, and that can impact the UK's weather. But given the time lag, we're not expecting any impacts from this weakening until later in February. And it's possibly going to act against something that's likely to give us very different results, La Nina. So that's likely to lead to a more unsettled start to February with wetter, windier and milder weather. So to summarise, we're expecting conditions to turn more unsettled as February begins. Wetter, windier, but also relatively mild across the UK, although you wouldn't discount occasional cold spells coming through from time to time, depending on the wind direction. This sudden stratospheric warming, we're not expecting to reverse the winds. We're expecting the winds to ease a little bit into the start of February, but any kind of implications on the UK's weather wouldn't be expected to come through until mid to late February, if they occur at all, and that's a big question mark because that doesn't always affect the UK's weather. In fact, sometimes it happens and there are no impacts on the UK's weather. So certainly something we'll keep an eye on. Lots of different complicated things affect our weather from day to day, from week to week, from season to season. And there's always something interesting to talk about, and we'll be right here talking about it in these deep dives. Thank you for joining me. Bye-bye for now.